You know, of the 9 books I've written, it occurred to me literally just minutes ago that the first and last have Pulitzer Prize connections. Not for my work, unfortunately, but still. The last was Will Eisner, A Spirited Life, a biography of the American master artist and writer, which featured an introduction by Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Michael Chabon. And my first book, Stadium for Rent, way back in '92, features dozens of editorial cartoons drawn by future Pulitzer Prize-winning artist Clay Bennett. Back then, Bennett was poking fun at local issues and political figures for the St. Petersburg Times. I've always regarded his style as kind of sneaky. The clean lines and the bold images let him club you over the head with his message while you're still chuckling. Bennett left the Times for the Christian Science Monitor, where he ultimately won his Pulitzer. Today, he's with the Chattanooga Free Press, of all places, and we'll certainly talk about that, I'm sure. Clay, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thanks, Bob.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing great here in beautiful Chattanooga, Tennessee. And just sipping coffee in my office and talking to you.
You know, I was just thinking, it's hard, as I was mentioning St. Petersburg and obviously the reference to baseball. Was there even a baseball team here when you left the Times?
Not when I left the Times, but by the time I left St. Petersburg, they were calling it a baseball team at that point. And I would take note that the Boston Red Sox have now pulled even with your Devil Rays just today. So I think that they finally realized here late in the season that, you know, they're supposed to stink. And I knew that this revelation would eventually hit them. So I was smug in my satisfaction watching the Red Sox pull in second place all this time.
I think I've just been clubbed over the head by those clean lines and bold images. My goodness.
No. Good luck to you in the playoffs. That's all I got to say.
Well, listen, I'd love to talk baseball for the whole hour, but we'd lose pretty much 90% of the audience if we did that. I know people want to hear you talk cartooning, and you know, we're doing this interview live. It's September 16th, 2008. And I have to think that while it's kind of a sucky day to be an American, what with the failures of Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch, the impending disaster of AIG insurance, and of course, not least of all, the cynical selection of Alaska Governor Sarah Palin as John McCain's running mate for the Republican nomination, it's got to be a great day to be an editorial cartoonist.
Oh, well, of course. You know, what do they say? What's bad for the country is always good for editorial cartoonists. So, Palin was a fantastic pick for editorial cartoonists, but not a great one for the country. She's, in my humble opinion, woefully unqualified for the office, especially being one, irregular heartbeat from the presidency. It's even more ominous.
Is it one irregular heartbeat, or is it one melanoma?
Well, I don't want to go there. I mean, it all sounds way too gruesome, and too much sort of predicting that they will win. Which at this point, I'm still hopeful that will not be the case.
Mm. So it would be fair to guess that your politics are to the left somewhere.
Yeah, I would guess somewhere over there. I never like to, certainly my friends would tell you this is not the case, but I don't particularly like to wear my politics on my sleeve so much. And, my cartooning style for years, I mean, although people who read me regularly would argue, certainly, I'm not one of those cartoonists that sort of, clubs you over the head. And, I don't know. I was just, I guess somewhere in my career, I figured, that you could do this for 50 years and look back and find that all you've done is preach to the choir. And I didn't want that to be the case with me. I really, truly am trying to be persuasive in my work. I'm not trying to alienate or polarize. I am trying to bring people over to the way I think. It may be a futile attempt on my part, but it's an attempt nonetheless.
How often do you criticize in the cartoons or make fun of? Choose your weapon. Someone whose politics that you agree with?
Well, I've been a professional cartoonist through, the latter days of the Carter administration, through the Reagan administration, the Bush, first Bush, Clinton, and now second Bush. And so really, at least at that echelon, I've only had, 8 years where the occupant of the White House was on my side of the playing field. Now Carter, again, just the waning months I'm talking. Now I was very critical of Bill Clinton, but sort of from the left. He was a fairly conservative Democrat by my reckoning, and he was the power behind welfare reform and NAFTA and a lot of issues that people on the far left might argue were not good for this country or for average Americans. Yet it was a Democrat who shepherded those programs through Congress. So, I mean, much like, Nixon opening the gates to China or a Southern Democrat by LBJ being the one who gets voting rights, sometimes politics makes very strange bedfellows.
When you started your career as an editorial cartoonist, and I know that you go back before the St. Pete Times. That's where I encountered you. But you also you worked as a staff artist at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, right, and the Fayetteville Times. Were you political early on, or did your political beliefs and values grow over time as you had the ability to comment on these things?
No, it was definitely. You always grow, obviously, but it was my passion for politics that drove me into this business, and so I'd always wanted to be a cartoonist ever since I can remember. 4 or 5 years old, that was my dream, and I would draw whatever cartoons I was particularly enamored of at any particular point in my childhood. It might be comic strips when I was reading, Peanuts and Alley Oop. And then it might have moved on to comic books when I was deep into DC or the Marvel universes. I even in the 4th grade remember putting out my own version of Mad Magazine, which was literally hand-drawn pages stapled together. I mean, there was one copy. And but when I became more political in nature, my passion for culture and politics was finally sort of came out of me. That's when I decided on editorial cartooning, and that was very young. I was, maybe 14 years old when I decided on editorial cartooning.
Wow.
So, I was kind of it was an early epiphany for me, politics, and, I would credit my family for a good deal of that. I had a father who was a sort of a lifelong Republican and Army man, and 2 older sisters who were sort of 60s hippies. So the dinner time debate was always, a rancorous one.
So you had the political leanings early. Did you always know? It sounds like you did. Did you always know that you had that art talent to pull it off?
Well, yeah. how do you know that you have it to pull it off? I mean, my dad would have always told me that, I was never going to make a go of this. But that's probably my advice to any young cartoonist today, just because of the job market. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you hope you can be a cartoonist. You wish that one day you might be a cartoonist, but it wasn't a job that you really saw adults doing. It wasn't someone you would meet on the street or would be a friend of your parents or something. I mean, I'd never met any cartoonists, so it was a mystical, sort of mysterious thing that these people who drew these pictures and actually got paid a living wage for it. And, that was really, the biggest prize I think I've ever won, was being able to have a career, doing this. I've been an adult for 30 years and I've never worn a suit. So, I mean, how great is that?
I'm reminded of Steve Martin at the banjo saying, "And I get paid for doing this."
Exactly. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all fun and games. It's hell on earth. I mean, it is not an envious, an envious position to be put in. To come in and look at this blank sheet of paper every morning and be creative on demand. It happens about one time a week. The rest of the time it's the virtue most of my cartoons have is they're exactly 6 inches wide by 4 inches deep. They'll fit the hole perfectly.
That's the one thing they all have in common. Huh?
That is the one thing they all have going for them. It will fill the space.
Well, I want to welcome everyone who's listening to us live today and certainly in the future, but also in the live web chat that accompanies the interview. And tell folks, I'm not intending to hog Clay for myself. If you've got a question to ask Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial cartoonist Clay Bennett of the Chattanooga Free Press, you can give us a call if you're listening live at 646-595-3135. And if you're in the web chat, you're more than welcome to ask a question there, and I will ask Clay for you. I know a lot of people tend to listen while they're at work and with their headphones on, and it's easier to listen than it is to call in and participate when you're in that situation. So feel free to call us or email or text in the web chat, and we'll ask your questions.
So, Bob, before we go on, 2 corrections.
Yeah.
2 corrections.
Yes, please. Okay.
Number 1 is the Times Free Press. The Chattanooga Times Free Press. It's a mouthful, but certainly they'd need to know that if they wanted to go to our fabulous website, timesfreepress.com, to see my cartoons. And number 2, earlier in my bio segment, you said I left the St. Pete Times to go to the Christian Science Monitor. Well, so I was fired by the St. Pete Times. I was handed my papers in '94 and spent 3 years of abject poverty and political oblivion, hanging on to my career before the Monitor came along to save my rear end. So, just to give credit where credit is due, I thought I would make those disclaimers.
I actually know that you were fired, but I didn't want to be the one to say it. Although I know
you needn't worry.
It says, I know it does say on your website that you were fired. I just didn't necessarily feel comfortable putting it that way, but I was going to ask you about it eventually. So,
no, I figure if you have nothing to be ashamed of, why skirt the truth? Absolutely.
Well, since you brought it up then, I was going to ask you about something else, but why don't we address that now that people are probably wondering, he got fired. He's an editorial cartoonist and he got fired by the paper. Do you want to, discuss what happened there?
It's certainly water under the bridge. But, I spent, 11 absolutely wonderful years working at the St. Pete Times. And unfortunately, I was there for 13 years. And the last 2 years being under the replacement for the man who hired me. The man who hired me way, way back in 1981, Robert Pittman, saint of a man, a wonderful guy. I was very, very lucky to have him as an editor in the early phases of my development as a journalist. He retired in, I guess, 92, and was replaced by another man named Phil Gailey. And he was our Washington bureau chief at the time at the St. Pete Times, and came in and, I guess over a year and a half or so, we kind of slugged it out, and eventually he told me my services were no longer needed, that my work did not meet the standards of the St. Petersburg Times. So, there you have it. And so I was devastated. I got to tell you, I went to a very dark, scary place and curled up in a fetal position for a few days, and eventually picked myself up and shook myself off and started all over again. And but it was not a very hospitable environment. I think some people thought I was sort of tainted goods, or there must have been something, that I did. I don't know, but I know that of the jobs that were open at the time, nobody was much interested in me. So, I tried web animation for a while and did everything short of squeegeeing people's windshields to pay my bills. And then 3 years later, the Christian Science Monitor came along, and it's been all gravy ever since.
Was the issue at the Times, was it a personality thing with Phil, who I must say lives around the corner from me? And I don't know him particularly well, but we walk our dogs sometimes at the same time. But was it a personality issue with Phil, or was it your politics that caused the?
I think a little of both. He had his own idea of where he wanted to take the St. Pete Times editorial page. I had been there by that time for, 11, 12 years. When it was, the paper was very near and dear to me, and the editorial page meant a lot. And I constantly reminded, the people in the morning editorial boardroom that we had precedent and we had ideals that were consistent throughout many decades that needed to be honored. And I guess, I became too much a squeaky wheel. And certainly my personal politics probably were not exact to his. And so, we parted ways.
I remember that time because it was, obviously that whole thing was fairly limited to you and the people on the board and maybe people above, but people in the community were just shocked because, whether they agreed with your politics or not, people looked for that cartoon from you, day after day, and to hear that you weren't there anymore, that was shocking. Now you were syndicated when you were at the Times, as I recall, and didn't you continue to be syndicated even in the 3-year period between the Times and the Christian Science Monitor?
Yeah, sure. It didn't pay much. I went out in sort of a package deal with some other cartoonists. So by the time you start slicing up that pie, individual slices get to be pretty thin. And so it really wasn't enough to make a living wage. And so I taught at sort of a college-level tech school, animation and Photoshop and I've got to say, during that 3 years, it did lead to a lot of, personal sort of artistic development. I had not touched a computer before I left the Times, and after I left, it was the first thing I bought. I needed it not only as an artistic tool, but I needed it for the resources of the Internet, because I no longer had a fancy morgue of photographs to dip into or Nexus searches to find out information I needed. I needed to do it all on my own. And so I figured out a computer from scratch, trained myself, and that's been invaluable to the development of my drawing style. So I continued to draw for King Features, making pennies. Did a little teaching. Taught juvenile felons for a while with some program that was a joint program with Juvenile Justice, Department of Juvenile Justice there in Pinellas County, and some art program. So I went into lockdown facilities and taught cartooning classes. That was very interesting.
Wow.
Did freelance artwork and lived very simply for 3 years.
And so in 97, the opportunity to join the Christian Science Monitor comes up. And I remember hearing about this at the time and thinking, okay, if the guy's politics caused him to lose his job at the St. Petersburg Times, which is fairly widely regarded as a fairly liberal paper, how's he going to fit in at the Christian Science Monitor? How did that happen?
Yeah, I wondered that myself. And I was as much as I needed the job, I was very honest with them when I came in to interview or went up to Boston to interview. It wasn't so much about the message of the cartoon with them. It was much more about the form. They were very tolerant of my political views, but they were very particular about how you express them. And this has to do with the whole mission of the newspaper. The motto of the Christian Science Monitor is to injure no man, but to bless all mankind. And so character assassination was out, which disappointed me because that was one of my really favorite things at the St. Pete Times. They don't like excessively gloomy cartoons, which again was sort of a bummer because, doom and gloom, again, that was one of my strengths. And, there was a whole kind of laundry list of things that they didn't particularly like in cartoons, which seemed to eliminate almost all cartoons by the time you went down the list. And sometimes I look back and wonder, I was there for 10 years, and and I'm kind of amazed that I could do it. And but my approach was something they liked initially. They saw something in me before I even started there that sort of was in their style, in their approach, and so, I was always a kind of an issue-oriented cartoonist instead of a personality-based one, and so that sort of avoids some of the the taboos of character assassination or cheap shots. And so as long as you kept it issue-oriented, you could skirt pretty close to being a cheap shot. That's what I found, and so I trudged through the minefield for 10 years and using my legs as the detector, and every once in a while you'd look down and you'd see a bloody stump there, but you muddle your way through and you try and learn their sensibilities. Right. And after 10 years, I can tell you, I still don't know what they are. I was just as confused the day I went out that door as the day I came in it. But wow. But it was a great relationship for me, and gosh, I just owe that newspaper, my political life. I hadn't drawn an editorial cartoon in 3 months when they called me for the interview, and it looked like that part of my career was dead and gone. And, I was about ready to just sort of hang it up and go on to other things. And they picked me up and put me back in the game. And that's all I needed was a second chance. And, like many people who are given a second chance, I wasn't going to blow it. And so I've worked hard at my job ever since, harder than I ever have.
I want to come back to the Monitor in a second, but we have a call on the line for you. Hi, do you have a question or comment for Clay Bennett? Hello? Gosh, I hate it when that happens. Someone's been waiting on the line quite a bit. Give you a second there. Do you have a question or comment for Clay Bennett? All right. call back if you do. So you were with, you won.
Brevity is the soul of wit, you know. So, I mean, that was one really hilarious call.
That was a good call. Right in the middle of your time with the Christian Science Monitor, you won the Pulitzer Prize. You had been there about 5 years, I think, and you stayed another 5 years. Take me back to the day that you found out that you won. What were you doing before you got the call, and and how different were things after that?
Well, you don't really get a call.
Okay.
It's not supposed to leak out, but it always does. Who the finalists are. So for about and it can be 2 weeks before the announcement. It could be 6 weeks before the announcement. The first year I was a nominated finalist was 1999, and it was the first time I was nominated. It was, of course, agonizingly tense. You lose sleep, you lose weight, you can't eat. It's just I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But it is rather exciting, and I had 6 weeks to wait. It was terrible, and of course, then I end up on the on the wrong side of the decision. Now, that was 99, and then so 2000 comes along, and I'm a finalist again, and I lose again. And 2001 comes along, I'm a finalist again, and I lose again. So you have to understand, by the time year 4 comes around, 2002, I had gone through 3 years of being exactly the Susan Lucci of Pulitzer Prizes. And so I truly did not expect, I expected another name to pop up on the screen. And when I say screen, I mean the AP wire, because that's what you do on that fateful Monday is you go to the AP wire about 3 o'clock when they start the announcements, and you just keep hitting refresh until they get down to your category. And so all I can remember is I'm in my editor's office. He's checking. My wife has come down to share my misery, I suppose. And all of a sudden it comes up Clay Bennett. The word's right there. There's no denying it. And and now my wife will tell you that I hugged my editor before I hugged her. I don't remember it that way, but that could have been the case because he was working the computer. But yeah, it was a blur. I hugged Clay Jones, my editor, I suppose, and I hugged my wife, and you can hear a cheer come up from the newsroom of the Monitor, because several people within the Monitor were doing exactly the same thing, refreshing AP. And so then, of course, my editor marches me out to the Monitor newsroom to be lauded for my accomplishment and give some sort of speech to the newsroom extemporaneously. And then we all, celebrated with sparkling water. It is the Monitor newsroom, after all.
Well, yeah.
And then people start calling for interviews, and news crews start showing up at the newspaper newsroom, and it's a blur from 3 o'clock till probably 7:30, 8 that night. I don't really remember what I did. All I remember was driving home with my wonderful wife and just looking over at her and saying, I did it. It happened. And so it's pretty awesome. I understand the nature of the beast, and I understand it's a very subjective thing, and it doesn't help me fill that blank sheet of paper one single bit the next day. But there's no denying its, cachet. You will be introduced as Pulitzer Prize winning such and such. You do know the first 5 words of your obit. All those things are true. And the only thing I can say is after that, filling that blank sheet of paper every morning became even more of a burden to me because all of a sudden you feel as though you have something to live up to.
Oh, my God. I am Clay Bennett, Pulitzer Prize winning editorial cartoonist.
Well, I never mention it,
I can't produce Clay Bennett schlock anymore. I've got to produce Clay Bennett. And
no more stick figures. But with me, stick figures have always been like, I'll do a nice oak stick with a shadow on one edge of the twig, and it's a whole different thing. But
well, let's take a breath. Let's see. Our caller has come back. Hopefully, it will work this time. And hello, do you have a comment or question for Clay Bennett?
No, I just want to listen. Thank you, Doug.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That's sort of one of those weird sort of perversion things, isn't it? That you just want to listen. It's
Be careful. Maybe that turns out to be your wife or someone. We'll take all the listeners we can get here. I just they called in on the switchboard, so I assumed they were calling to ask you a question.
Sure.
And it was funny. I have to tell you, just to give you a chance to catch your breath for a second, but I've only had 2 calls in I don't know what seems like about 100 interviews on Blog Talk now where people can call in, and one was a guy who called in. I was interviewing a guy with the Washington Post who wrote a book called The Commission about the 9/11 Commission, and it was a very serious conversation. We've been on about 30 minutes, and he calls in. He says, "Hey, I'm from Canada, and I wondered if you could just kind of review for me what you've been talking about so far." Hey? And I said,
I'm late. I'm late to the conversation. Quick synopsis. Yeah, that's funny.
And there was some guy who called a few weeks ago who was just kind of a jerk to a guest. But I've never had somebody call up and say, I just want to listen. I don't want to ask a question. Okay. So you have the Pulitzer, and how were the second 5 years, if at all, different from the first 5 years at the Monitor? Did you have any more sense that you were any freer to do what you might have liked than you were in the first 5 years?
No. It was pretty consistent. They were very particular about, what appeared on the pages of their newspaper. And that's fine. It's their newspaper. And, the way I kind of looked at it was, look, that you can print whatever you want, and I'll draw whatever I want. And hopefully, we won't be too far off from each other. As long as the number of cartoons that get killed doesn't grow too much of a proportion, I think we can both be happy. But we sort of lived with the sort of 1 in 10 kill rate for the whole 10 years. I would have probably, 1 in 10 cartoons bite the dust. And, that doesn't sound terribly bad proportionately, but if you think about over the course of a year, you draw, 225 cartoons? That's 22 and a half cartoons that were killed. Well, the half cartoon I could understand because it wasn't even a full cartoon, so it should have gotten killed. But the other 22, I was confident they should have seen ink. But, I think everything I draw should at least be published. I don't think they're all good, but I never thought that they were too outrageous for print. So it was always sort of a source of friction for us, but maybe a combative relationship is an exciting one.
Do you think there was a discipline that working for the Monitor imposed on you that would explain being nominated 4 consecutive years for the Pulitzer and then finally winning?
5 consecutive years, because I was a nominee the year after I won too. So it was bizarre. And I don't know, Bob. I think that working at the Monitor was a very useful sort of exercise. If you think about, running straight down a track, that's good exercise, and you're going to become faster. But if all of a sudden you have to run down that track and jump over steeplechases and hurdles and around objects, and you're going to become even more sort of well-rounded, and your muscles will be exercised even more. It's the same way with cartooning. Is if you have all these sort of barriers and obstacles and sort of red flags and that you have to avoid, I mean, it really makes you kind of circle around an issue and kind of find the back door in, and if they don't want you to be really outrageous or really mean-spirited, but you want to be, you got to think of a very subtle way to do it. And so, it's like you're at a cocktail party and there's a real jerk there, and you want to really tell him off. You want to scream at him, but if you end up screaming at him, you're going to look as bad as him. So what you do is you find a clever way of dressing him down, one where he almost doesn't even understand, doesn't even perceive that he is being criticized, but everybody else around him does. So you have everybody at the party sort of laughing at him, and he doesn't even know he's being laughed at until he's driving home and he goes, "Hey, I think that guy was insulting me." Well, that's what I wanted my editors to do. Is like be driving home every night and go, maybe I shouldn't have printed that cartoon. Holy smokes, what was I thinking? So it's all about subtlety. It's all about, I never wanted my cartoons to be devoid of substance or opinion. I just needed to find a way to do that, to reconcile all the interests.
Well, I want to talk in a minute about the nuts and bolts of your craft, but I think it's important to kind of wrap up. I obviously knew a bit about your time at the St. Pete Times, and you won the Pulitzer when you were at the Christian Science Monitor, but you left the Monitor in 2007, and now you're with the Chattanooga Times Free Press.
Very good.
Which I will point out is www.timesfreepress.com. It's all solid. I have to tell you, the fact that I got the name of a newspaper wrong is a little embarrassing to me as Mr. Media, but also as a guy who's been around newspapers a long time. I had never heard of the paper, and I'm wondering what you're doing there. And I'm sure maybe other people will, and I'll just ask it that bluntly. It's not a lack of respect for the paper.
I understand. There were people that scratched their heads, yeah. I mean, the Christian Science Monitor is like, way deep in rep. It's up in Boston. How could you not love living in Boston unless you had to pay like a mortgage? There were many factors at play. Obviously, the dynamic that existed creatively was always a challenge to me there. And Boston was very expensive. It was a wonderful place to live, and I really love my Red Sox and still do to this day. But, I'm a Southern boy at heart. My folks live in Huntsville, Alabama, which is about 100 miles from here. I grew up around the South, went to high school and college along the Tennessee River. And when this job opened up, there were several aspects that I liked about it. Was number one, its location. I have always loved Chattanooga. Even when it was a dirty industrial town back in the 70s, I liked it because it had an identity. It wasn't a sprawling sort of southern city that was just strip malls and subdivisions. It was it had a real downtown. It had a real history to it. It was an industrial town, for good or bad. And in the 70s, that was for bad. It was voted like the dirtiest city in America in 1969, I believe, and spent many years recovering from that. It is a beautiful town now. Rejuvenated. The downtown is beautiful. The mountains and the river and the scenery, it's just a fabulous place to live. And the paper itself is the merge of two former papers, the Chattanooga Times, which was founded by Adolph Ochs, who founded the New York Times. He didn't found the New York Times until he founded the Chattanooga Times, I'll have you know. But so the Ochs family was real deep into Chattanooga, and they were fighting it out with a paper, the Chattanooga Free Press, which was founded by, much later, in the 30s, by a guy who owned a grocery store. And it started out, it was the Free Press because it was given out for free. And it was mainly just a vehicle to sort of advertise his goods. But then it became a legitimate daily newspaper, and they fought for years and eventually merged into one paper. So it's a solid paper. It's got its market sewn up. It seemed like a fairly stable place to live and work in these very tumultuous times as a journalist. I mean, you got to think job security is one thing you got to worry about, especially when you're 50 years old. And so I looked for that. I looked for artistic freedom, which, you know, they promised me I would have here and have delivered. And ownership of my own work, which I didn't have in Boston. The Christian Science Monitor owned my work. So it was mainly those three reasons: job security, creative freedom, and ownership of my work that I came down here. All the rest has been just icing on the cake. The beautiful town and the great locale and all that stuff. So
I want to tell folks that if you know Clay's work from the St. Pete Times or the Christian Science Monitor or from being syndicated, let me give you a little more direction to find his work on the Chattanooga Times Free Press site. Go to timesfreepress.com and you'll see a red bar along the top. It says Home and then News. Go to News. There's a drop-down menu, Editorial Cartoons. That'll take you to a page where you'll see Clay's work. And it's funny because I was asking you when we started about all the financial news, and it gives you a lot to play with. It's a wonderful cartoon today. And again, this is September 16th, 2008, because I know a lot of people will first hear this on the archive or they'll download from iTunes. But the cartoon, it's a guy coming out his door, out the porch, and on the sidewalk he's in his robe in the morning and his slippers, and he leans over to pick up his newspaper, which is
the Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal. And the big headline, you can read it, says, "You'd better sit down."
Such a soft touch. You know, I'm such a warm and fuzzy kind of cartoonist. You know?
Let me remind people that unless they just want to listen, we've still got one more segment left. We'll go another 15 minutes or so. If you've got a question for Pulitzer Prize winning editorial cartoonist Clay Bennett of the Chattanooga Times Free Press, give us a call, 646-595-3135. And again, that's only if you're listening live. Otherwise, Clay is back to his drawing board, and I'm sitting out by the pool watching the dog fly into the pool.
That's right. Do you ever get calls like in the middle of the night, somebody going, "I want to talk to that cartoonist"?
Not yet, but now that you've suggested that, I'm sure that's going to happen.
Well, I'm going to call you.
All right, I really, before we get done, I know a lot of the people who'll be listening come to us from places like dailycartoonist.com and comicsreporter.com, and they have a real interest in how you do what you do. So take us for a couple minutes into your drawing studio and let us in on some of your technical secrets. I mean, for starters, what kind of table do you sit at?
Well, I used to be like a regular drawing board kind of guy, and I gave that up a long time ago just because I don't know, the actual sort of physical nature of my work is not as well, I can't really say that. I mean, I'm sitting here right now looking at tomorrow's cartoon, and so what I do is I start sketching little bitty thumbnails on just like typing paper. And I'm telling you, these little thumbnail drawings aren't, even 4 inches wide. They're like, maybe 2 by 3 or something. They're teeny tiny things, and they're just scribbles. But they're the real nut of the idea right there. And I even will, once I find one that I really want to go with, I'll start drawing those little bitty drawings under pieces of tracing paper, and I might, fill in a little bit of the detail, but still, it's teeny tiny. And so once I get that to any kind of compositional level that I like, I'll pop it on the scanner, scan it into Photoshop, blow it up to about 10 inches wide, I guess, and print it off a printer. Now, it's still a really rough sketch. So what I do then is I take that and slip it under a piece of tracing paper, and it gives me a little more room to work the lines, and I work with a Flair pen. It's very low tech with tracing paper. And so my final ink drawing is on a very, very thin sheet of tracing paper in Flair pen ink, felt tip marker, and I scan that into the computer once it's done, and it becomes a layer in Photoshop, the lines layer. And then it's, I don't want to be a real geek, kind of Photoshop geek here, but, I use layers in Photoshop to establish, like, the shapes of the objects way down low. If you think of it like a Dagwood sandwich, right? I got the lines are the top piece of the bread, and the shapes of the objects are the bottom piece of the bread. And all the ingredients in between those two pieces of bread are maybe the words in the cartoon, maybe the shadows, the highlights, eventually the color. So it's all these layers in between that really give it the form, texture, the light source, the depth. And so, and working in a computer is really nice. You can get a nice depth of field. You can take your background and fog it like a photograph might see it. And you can really direct the eye very well using Photoshop, using a computer to help out your meager physical abilities. But so, I do a lot of drawing beforehand, but still, I would say 60% of the drawing is done, digitally with ones and zeros.
Interesting. And I can see, it's interesting. I'm really glad you described that, because I'm looking at today's cartoon, the one I described a moment ago, and you can kind of see that the guy is bolder and more upfront. It's almost like like looking at an animation still, because you see him the lines are a little bolder, a little sharper, and then the background is a little softer and more subtle.
Well, it was one of my big influences was Warner Brothers Studios. And so if you ever notice on a Warner Brothers animation, the foreground characters have black ink outlines, but the backgrounds are usually these nice little washy things without, firm outlines. And again, it gives a nice full environment, beautiful detail, but not distracting to the eye. Your eye still follows the object that they intend for you to look at. So, yeah, I've adopted a bit of that in my own work.
I want to take just a second before we continue. If you're with us for Clay Bennett, you will probably enjoy a couple of interviews that are coming up live on Mr. Media. Friday, September 19th, just a few days from now, Mike Lynch, who's a magazine cartoonist, does single-panel cartoons for a number of magazines, will be joining me. And way off in the future, Wednesday, November 12th, Patrick McDonnell, who does the Mutz daily comic strip, will be a guest. Seemed like a good time to point out that stuff. In general, Clay, which cartoon will be funnier and more memorable? The idea that comes to you quickly, or the one that you roll over and over and over again in your mind and on paper?
It could be either. What's important is that at the end of the day, both of them look like that first scenario you described. I mean, the art of cartooning is to make everything, even the ideas that you beat out of concrete, look like they were molded with butter. And, it's the illusion of spontaneity that's important. I mean, you can work these things to death, but if they look like they've been worked to death, they're going to die. It's a certain grace and poetry and fluidity that a cartoon idea has that makes it a great cartoon. you can achieve that either of those ways. I mean, you can work it to achieve that, or it can just come to you like a bolt of lightning. Now, of course, the ones that come like a bolt of lightning are much better because, you know, you don't perspire as much. You know, it's not as much work. They do just sort of present themselves to you. But you can achieve a really nice cartoon, I think, either way. Let me avoid that question. Sounds like a damn politician here.
That's all right.
Both are right, you know. Two great tastes that taste great together.
Hey, we've got another call. Let's see if they just want to listen or ask a question. Hi, do you have something you want to say to Clay Bennett?
No, I just want to listen. No, I'm just...
He wants to watch.
I was wondering what Clay thought of the Red Sox now tying place.
Oh, shut up, both of you.
We won't rub it in with Bob. You know, he's a Devil Rays fan, but you know, I've been predicting it. I thought that the Devil Rays would fade much sooner than this, but you know, apparently there is a God.
Hey, guys, they haven't taken possession of first. They're just renting a little space there now.
Okay. But I'm elated. The short answer is I am elated that they are now pulled even and positioning themselves to surge into the lead. The surge is working, but not in a rock.
All right. Any other questions?
Oh no, I just wanted to say it's terrific when Clay, of course, is doing his usual verbal gymnastics and being quite enjoyable to listen to.
This is a really good friend of mine calling from Massachusetts, and a wonderful cartoonist in his own right, and a dedicated Red Sox fan for many more years than I suffered through, Mark Parisi, who draws off-the-mark cartoons. So
you just came here for the good years of the Red Sox.
That's right. That's right. You know, I mean, but you know, hey, the good luck charm's gone, and you guys are still doing great. So I'm just glad that I didn't jinx them by leaving.
Well, Mark, thanks for calling in. I appreciate the call, even if it did leave a pain between my ribs.
I'm sorry about that. I'm truly
all right. That's all right.
See you, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, man. By the way, we don't call them the Devil Rays anymore.
Yeah, I know. I heard that. I guess, you know, that you got... Are they officially just the Rays?
Yeah, they changed the name. They changed everything.
So was it some sort of like a religious right thing that they were getting the devil out of the uniforms or something? You know, I mean... You know,
I think there were people who complained about that. I think the biggest complaint for years was just that it was... Maybe after the Columbus Blue Jackets, it was just about the stupidest name for a sports franchise ever. And, you know, it was a losing franchise. The original owner was a nightmare for the community. And you know, they had someone new come in and pretty much buy out the franchise. He was a lifelong Mets fan. And gave it a completely different attitude. It took a year or so, and you know, really studied the operation and realized that everyone called the team the Rays. No one in town called them the Devil Rays unless they were really angry about them.
Right.
Dropped that. It made certain religious people happy that they weren't supporting the Devil Rays, but mostly I think it was just the community just said, you know what, it's a stupid name. It's got a stupid look. It sounds bad, and it's a losing thing. Drop it. Yeah. And, you know, it's amazing how quickly the franchise turned around once it became just the Rays and not the Devil Rays.
Well, it's like when the Buccaneers, you know, changed their helmets. All of a sudden they were killer. You know, they got that cool pirate flag thing going, and, you know, now they're fearsome.
Well, we have just another minute or two. Do you cartoon in your sleep? I mean, that is to say, do you get ideas when you should be resting?
You mean literally while I'm in my sleep, or just, you know, just when I'm off the job? Because cartooning, much like being a cop, is a 24-hour-a-day job, let me tell you. And you could be called to do cartooning at any given time. And, you could have like one of those, fire station poles down to your studio or something, just so you'd be ready. But, no, I think of cartoons all the time. I'm always kind of thinking cartooning. Do I do it in my sleep? Yeah, okay. I have, awakened in the middle of the night and thought, I just had a dream that I thought of the best cartoon I've ever drawn in my whole life. It's the best. That's all I could remember. But I couldn't remember what the idea was, what it was about. I couldn't remember anything. All I remember is it was the best cartoon idea ever. And so how frustrating is that? Geez, it just put me back to sleep. But anyways, that's as close as I could come. I've never really had an idea like I wake up and go, oh, yeah, there.
Well, listen, we've got, I don't know why everybody waited till the end of the show, but we've got two people on hold right now. So I'll tell you what, if you can stay a minute or two long.
I'm just happy because, what, you have 2 calls total before now? Now I'm bringing them in droves. This is doing great for my self-esteem.
Oh, good. And if you're listening to us live, the show will stop streaming at 2 p.m., but this will all record, so you may need to go back and just listen to the archive in a few minutes. And if you're listening as an archive, you'll hear the whole show. Okay, let's go first to this call. Hi, do you have a question or comment for Clay Bennett?
Yeah, I was wondering, what's it like doing local cartoons now that you're in Chattanooga, and how do you split your time between local and national, international issues? I do a lot of local cartoons, and just kind of curious to see how you do it.
Well, that's a really good question. Okay, so you come into a local area, you're a new guy in town. I'm trying to answer real quickly because it's like 3 minutes till 2. But
no, you're fine. Take all the time.
So the thing is that you don't want to come in and start trotting around in people's houses. You got to kind of come into the area like a guest. And so you don't walk into someone's house and go, hey, rearrange this furniture. That couch would look better against that wall. You got to be respectful that you are the interloper for a certain amount of time. So that being said, I have sort of kind of dipped my toe into local cartooning before I take the real jump. So right now I'm not doing as many as I would like, and I'm sort of very careful about picking the local issues I do because some are really easy, pollution issues, that kind of stuff. But so I don't know. I don't approach them any differently than I would approach any cartooning, be it about China or Russia or the United States or the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department. So it's usually what motivates me is my own sort of disgust and anger and outrage when I read the paper. So if it's a local story that inspires those sentiments, so be it. But I really can't think of any way I approach local cartoons that's different than my other cartooning.
Okay.
So I spent a long time not answering that question, didn't I?
Okay. Do you want to
I don't know if there's a good answer to that question. I was just sort of curious about it. So.
Yeah. Well.
Where do you work?
I do freelance cartoons for the Wisconsin State Journal up in Madison, Wisconsin, and actually the Tampa Tribune down in Tampa.
Ah, Phil.
Oh, so you know who I am? Okay.
I know everybody is. I'm like the NSA, man. I've been tapping your phone. But well, nice of you to call in, Phil.
I was just drawing a cartoon and heard it and thought I'd see what was going on, see how you felt about doing local issues again.
Oh, I love it. People around here get so. The mayor of Chattanooga the other day was so pissed off at me.
Isn't that a good feeling?
Yeah, he was emailing my publisher all weekend. He was so mad. So it was great.
That's great.
As long as you have a publisher that doesn't mind getting emails on the weekend, it's great. And I don't, so it's terrific. They're very supportive of my work here.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
Phil, thanks for calling in. We appreciate that.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Good question.
No problem.
All right. Let's check in on our other caller. And again, we're going to continue the show. Although if you're listening live, you may lose the stream, but we will be here, and you can come back and listen on the archive. Hi. Do you have a question or comment for Clay Bennett?
Yes, I do. I have a question about, well, I can tell by what he's been saying that he is a big working man. Is he a family man, too?
Oh, this is not a cartoonist here, but this is my daughter, Sarah. Yes, I am a family man, Sarah, and I have a beautiful wife, Cindy Procius, a great oil painter, and a wonderful son, Ben, son who's now in the Navy, at boot camp, Matt, and a dog named Ace. That's about does it. Oh, wait, there was a little girl, too, an 11-year-old named Sarah, who's absolutely the apple of my eye. So thanks for calling.
Sarah, why don't you tell us what it's like living with a dad as a cartoonist.
Well, it's kind of crazy how he has all those different conventions to go to. He gets all sorts of awards.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough on everybody. She just complains she doesn't get any of the money. You know.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad that you called in. That was very nice. I have an 11-year-old daughter myself, and
why aren't you in school?
Well, that was my next question.
Sarah, why aren't you in school?
Oh, I wasn't feeling well.
Oh, man. Okay, we'll talk about this later.
I hear that. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for calling in and questioning your dad across the nation for us. Appreciate it.
I love you, Sarah. See you later.
Love you too, Dad. Bye.
Bye. Well, that was a fine way to end. I'm just sorry that we didn't get her in while we were live on the network, but everybody who hears the
extended, unabridged version, yes, they'll get to.
They will definitely hear that.
It will warm the cockles of their heart.
Exactly. Well, listen, Clay, thank you so much for your time. It's always good to talk. It's been a while. And folks, check out Clay Bennett's work at the Chattanooga Times Free Press. That's www.timesfreepress.com. Or check out his personal site, www.claybennett.com, claybennett.com. Clay, thanks very much for calling.
Bob, it was my pleasure, and thanks so much for having me on.
Appreciate it. You take care.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. And, of course, for dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. It's where you can listen to my conversations with the creators, stars, writers, and producers of The Cleaner, Star Wars, The Clone Wars, SpongeBob SquarePants, Heroes, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Army Wives, 24, The Big Bang Theory, Bad Santa, Tell Me You Love Me, The Dark Knight, Zits, Baby Blues, Leo, Pearls Before Swine, and many others. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, digitaljournal.com, Podcast Pickle, Vox.com, Folio, Mediafly.com, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, Kindle, or iTunes. That list is getting mighty long, folks. And if you've got an idea for a guest, or if you think you yourself might make a good guest, email me directly at bob@Andelman, ANDELMAN.com. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate when you share a piece of your day with Mr. Media. Talk to you again real soon, folks. Bye-bye.